Welcome back to another episode of DataCube's online training course from Microsoft Power BI. I hope you're enjoying the series so far. Now in this episode we're going to speak about data modes. What do I mean by data modes? Let's open Power BI and go and have a look. I've opened up Power BI and it's just a blank workbook, so I'm going to connect some data. And now you don't get this option with every different data connection, so I'm just going to start with sort of standard database connection. So if I look at SQL Server Database, connect into one of those. Now when I get my server and database come up, you can see here underneath data connectivity mode, and there's a little icon here with information. Select the default storage mode for new tables. We've got these two options, import or direct query. But what's the difference between these two? So start with import. So this is where you can, if I connect it into a server and a database, I could select one or multiple tables to connect into. With import mode, it is actually importing that data and loading it into Power BI. So as you create visuals, charts, interact with your data, query it, it's already preloaded it. So there's that initial sort of lag time of that loading that data, but once it's in. When you query, it's querying it there. It's not having to interact with your server and database schema. So if you wanted to then have to be able to refresh your data, so if your data was live, or just say you hadn't refreshed it for a week, you'd have to do that manually. You have to press the refresh button, which sits up here, which is blanked out at the moment because I'm not connected to any data. And then obviously you've got that load time again, so that initial load time. But once it's in, and it's quick to play around with. Direct query, on the other hand, as the name might suggest, is that it's not loading any data in, it's not importing anything, and it's keeping a constant connection live with your database. So although all your fields, your columns, your header, your columns will appear in this field list over here, they aren't actually imported there, they've got a live connection. So the benefits of this is that you never have to press refresh, the data's always live, but it's constantly having to ping messages between Power BI and wherever your data is held. So what does all this actually mean? I've got a few slides to bring up here. So import mode, that first one, it's very fast to query data once you've imported it in. You've got all the functionality, so all your DAX functionality, which we haven't really spoken about yet in this series. So all your sort of formulas, you have full functionality on those. Your maximum import size is 1 gigabyte, not 1 giga. And data, as we said, needs to be manually refreshed, or you can actually schedule it to do it if you've published them online, and we'll get to that in a later episode. But there's obviously an extra additional thing that you have to manage there because you have to scheduling those refreshes. So what are the limitations of import? So you want to publish your reports online, have it refreshed with live data. No, you can't do that. You have to do it manually. You can set up your imports, and yeah, we're going to have a look at those in a later episode. So direct query, on the other hand, is always up to date. You never need to refresh your data manually. You can work with super large databases, but the performance can become slow. So if you've got lots of data, it's being interacted with lots of filters, then it can become really slow and laggy, especially online. And they've put restriction limitations on the DAX formulas you can use, so these especially occur in time functions. So if you wanted to pull a year out of a date or a month, then, and even some other simple things like rank, min, max, these are all restricted. So our main limitations with direct query is this DAX functionality. is put restrictions in place so that you can't interact with your data in the same way. There's always workarounds, but it ends up that your formulas go from maybe 1 or 2 lines of DAX to 20 really quickly, which then takes into account the fact that you could create quite a lot of user error. You can actually turn these restrictions off. They've been put in place because it's to save resource, to save that load capacity. So it's probably not advisable to turn them off, but it's probably worth testing whether you can get away with turning them off and using the DAX functionality you want to use. So although you can work with very large data sets, there is a 1 million row limit unless you were using premium capacity. Now, we touched on some of those really expensive license packages last week when we spoke about licenses, and that premium capacity is part of those expensive premium license bills. So for performance, I've put on that it's fast and it's slow. So it's fast because you never have to wait for that data to refresh, because you don't have to manually do it. There's not that sort of load up time that you have to wait for. But because it's constantly pinging back and forward, it can be slow. I'm not saying it is slow. It can be slow when there's lots of data and there's lots of different things going on with the underlying data. Now, there's this is mainly problematic when you've published a report online, you've got lots of users going on there querying, it's pinging back and forward from your database a lot, and it basically makes it look like you've got really slow servers. Or it's like when you go to an old school website and there's a big long lag load up time, and it just doesn't look very professional. There's something else that interacts with it. So later on in this series we're going to talk about RLS, so row level security. We'll talk about roles, but these can have a sort of exponential effect on that load time as well. So how does all this affect you? So I've put sort of 4 general examples of you being a user, and so it's sort of easy to answer these questions and see which way you want to connect in. So if you have a small data set, it doesn't need updating regularly. It might be held locally, you might not even be publishing it online. You can just use import mode, it's absolutely fine. If you want to publish online with lots of refreshes, it's a manageable data set, it's not going to be slow, it's not going to be laggy, use direct query. It's the faff-free way of never having to update your data set, because it's got that live connection up into your database. Publishing online with lots of refreshes and taking ages to load, you might want to switch back over to import mode, but if you have that problem but you've also got a big budget, and you can afford to be pushing up into those premium capacities, then you can switch into direct query instead, and that will be taking care of most of your problems for you. And it can be fast because you can pay for it to be fast, basically. You can have dedicated resource, dedicated capacity that's split across multiple servers. There is something you ought to bear in mind though. So we're back in Power BI and we're choosing which data connectivity mode to use. Now, if you've selected direct query and you've connected in, you've created your report or whatever you might be building in Power BI, at the bottom right of your screen you'll have a little toggle over here which says switch to import mode. So you can always switch back to import mode and allow those manual refreshes or schedule refreshes or however you want to manage your data flows coming in. If you are on import mode, you cannot then change back to direct query. So it's something you really need to bear in mind when you are setting up your workbook or your report. From the onset you have to make that decision, because if you are in import mode it's tricky to then switch it back into direct query. Thanks for watching, hope that's really useful and giving you a good guide on the differences between import mode, direct query and what works for you. Now next week we're going to be speaking about data parameters, Really interesting topic, so make sure you tune in next week. Look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much.